So I went to go see a movie called Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri today, which is getting a whole bunch of love from the film fans. It was screened at several different film festivals last year and has been getting all kinds of praise for its incredible writing. So I'm like, all right, let me check this thing out for myself. The movie is written and directed by Martin McDonagh, and it stars an ensemble cast: Woody Harrelson, Frances McDormand, Sam Rockwell, who's awesome, John Hawkes, and Peter Dinklage, who I'm also a big fan of. This movie is a little bit difficult to review for me because there's so many things to talk about with this movie that it's hard to really kind of put it together to make a review that you guys can listen to without getting kind of lost, because there's a lot of stuff going on. So I'm just going to go pretty much with going through like the plot and the characters and why the movie really does deserve the praise that it's getting, because the writing in this movie was absolutely phenomenal. And I don't mean just the plot, but also the way these characters are. This is a great film to watch if you want to get a character study that is a little bit nihilistic, a little bit postmodern, but also very realistic. And I'll get into the details of what I mean here in just a minute. The story, the plot of the movie, it follows this lady named Mildred Hayes, who is played by Frances McDormand, and her story is that her daughter was raped and murdered, and she felt that the police department and the law enforcement officers in Ebbing, Missouri didn't do what she felt needed to be done to find out who it was that committed the crime. She felt that the cops were more focused on racial profiling and overall being bullies, that they didn't spend the proper time that she felt was needed to try to solve the murder and the rape of her daughter. And what ends up happening is she puts up these 3 billboards right outside of town that pretty much are calling out the cops. And it's funny because even though the billboards aren't even in a major metropolitan part of the town, it still has enough impact and enough attention put on it that it winds up flipping the town of Ebbing, Missouri upside down, as well as the characters in the film. Specifically, Sam Rockwell's character of Dixon, who is one of the cops that pretty much fits that bill of a guy who is pretty much a racist and abuses his power, and we see that as the film progresses. But his counterpoint is his boss, who is played by Woody Harrelson, who is named Officer Willoughby, and from his perspective, he's a good cop. Even though he's a very flawed character, he is a good cop who, from his perspective, he tells Mildred, look, we have no leads on this case. He would have loved to have resolved the case, but there was just not enough information, not enough data, not enough evidence to convict anybody. And the movie does a great job of playing with you, because you think this film's going to be this sort of rivalry between Mildred and Willoughby, but at some point in the movie, without going into spoilers, something happens with Willoughby's character, and then as the film progresses, you find out that the real character arc of the movie is with Dixon, the racist cop. And really, Sam Rockwell stole the show with this freaking movie. Frances McDormand did a great job as well. And of course, I mean, Woody Harrelson's always awesome, but Sam Rockwell to me was the MVP of this movie, just with everything that he did, every scene he did, and his character has a very, very interesting arc that I'm not going to get into, but it's very interesting what happens to him, because you have expectations and the film subverts them, but not in a way where it's a slap in the face. You know, I walked out of the movie theater thinking, this film, there were some similarities with this movie and Last Jedi, namely the fact that both films really have this nihilistic and postmodern perspective of the human race. You know, Star Wars has always been good guys versus bad guys. Last Jedi had more kind of shades of gray, where you had people kind of walking that razor's edge, and this movie does something similar, where again, it's nihilistic, it doesn't exactly have the happiest of circumstances, but it's also very realistic. And I think the difference between the two movies is that, in my opinion, the characters in this film were written significantly better. And the movie does subvert your expectations, but it doesn't do it in a gimmicky way. It does it in a way to where it shows the realities of life, whether it be grim or whether it be happy. And there are moments in the movie with all of these characters that show both sides of really life, and how sometimes when you do things, they don't always turn out the way you want. And I think the main theme of this movie that really, really drew me in is the fact that the movie has consequences. Characters have consequences for their actions, not just to themselves, but also to the entire town and to those around them. When Mildred puts up these 3 billboards, she has good intentions. She's doing it because she thinks the cops are dogging it, and she wants them to kind of get up and resolve this case. But what she doesn't understand is that because of her steadfastness and because of the fact that she's so determined and driven to, in her mind, do the right thing, what winds up happening is it ends up leading to some negative consequences with certain characters. And as the film progresses and as the layers start to be peeled away, you start to learn about Mildred's imperfections. She's a very stubborn person. She's very hard to deal with. She can be kind of cruel sometimes. And it mirrors the character arc of Sam Rockwell, who's kind of like her, but a little bit worse. And then the two characters sort of diverge together by the end of the film, which I'm not going to spoil, like I said, but it's just a great, great character study because it really shows that people sometimes think they're doing the right thing and they have good intentions, but they take it too far. And I know I'm somebody who's kind of been like that in the past in my own life. So the film definitely spoke to me. Sometimes we say and we do things that we think are righteous, but we don't think about the consequences of somebody else's, adverse opinion or lifestyle. And that's sort of like what this movie kind of presents to the audience with its characters. Mildred and Dixon and all these characters, Willoughby, they're all sort of characters that you want to get behind, but then they do something where you're like, you know what? That person's a douche, but at the same time you're like, yeah, I kind of get why they would do that. And the movie does kind of play with that. The performances and the acting and this real character study is the film's strengths. And the movie really portrays these characters as being very human because in real life we are all shades of gray. It's not black or white. It's not good guys and bad guys, which is pretty much what the original Star Wars trilogy, the Marvel movies, you get those kind of elements there, where you have the heroes and the villains, and that's fine. I mean, that's classic storytelling. This movie is much more like the real world. There is one scene in the film, though, halfway through, where Dixon does something that's pretty damn shocking, and the way that scene was shot was great, because it was almost like one take, the way they did it, moving at a very fast pace and committing an act that is not very, let's just say, good cop-ish. Again, I'm not going to get into it, but he does suffer consequences for it. But the way that scene was shot was incredible, and it was great performances, and it was a shocking scene. But the one thing that took me out of the film is that he does this, and there are no consequences in the way that there would be in the real world. So there are consequences. He does kind of pay for what he did in a way, but if this happened in the real world, it would be handled much differently. That's the one little thing that took me out of the film. I'm not saying it ruined the movie, but it was like, okay, why is this not really being followed up on the way it would be in the real world? Because these characters are supposed to be real cops. And what really surprised me about the movie is that it is, in a weird way, a dark comedy, but it doesn't really have the same tonal issues that other movies do. Because obviously when you make a movie that's revolving around the rape and murder of a person, you can't really make that into a joke unless you're going for a really edgy dark comedy kind of territory. But the movie doesn't make a joke of that incident, but the way the characters act during certain situations and circumstances and the chemistry between them is funny in a realistic kind of banterous way. It's sort of like a toned down Kevin Smith, Quentin Tarantino movie, where it's not as over the top and crazy, even though there's a couple of parts of the movie that were. The characters talk like they would in real life, and in the real world we sometimes say funny stuff without realizing it. So the movie does play with that, and the characters have so much charisma, these actors do, that you do end up laughing, and there is a dark humor aspect to it, but it doesn't make light of the serious overtone, which is this woman who is upset and angry at the entire world, takes it out on people who don't even deserve it, including her ex-husband. There's problems with her husband, the police department, and even some of her friends. There's Peter Dinklage's character, James, does something really nice for her, and she seems very like she doesn't even care, and that's the thing. She's so caught up in her own obsession with this murder of her daughter, which, again, if you go through, I've never been through that, but I can imagine that you would get caught up in that, but it creates sort of her having no empathy for anybody else except for those who really are willing to help her. And that was interesting. And then with the character Dixon, who the movie follows both their paths, the crooked cop or whatever, he's going through a big come to Jesus meeting. But at the end of the day, the wonderful thing about the movie is that by the time you're done watching it, you realize that these two people who on the surface are very different people actually have one big thing in common, and that is that they both need purpose in their life, With Mildred, it's to find the killer, and with Dixon, it becomes a self-preservation-esque story where he's trying to absolve himself of guilt, not realizing that some of the things that he's doing to absolve himself of guilt are not necessarily good things. But again, you do root for Mildred in the movie, and the movie does have a couple of big, like, what the hell, like WTF moments where you're watching the movie and you think you can figure out what's going on. You're like, okay, I've been here before, and then something happens in the middle of the movie, then something happens right after where you're like, whoa, like I was not expecting that. And I love that because it wasn't something that was pulled out of nowhere. It was built up and it made sense. And then when it happened, it was still shocking because you're kind of starting to really, without going into, this is hard to talk about without spoilers, but something happens to a character, and like I said, you are starting to really warm up to the character, and then something happens and you're like, whoa, like, wait a minute, like the character does something and you're like, but I was just starting to like you, like, you know, why'd you do that? Like, I love that. What a great fucking movie, dude. Jeez. And the movie also plays with forgiveness, too. There's another character who has something bad happen to him in the middle of the film by another character. Then they reunite later on in the movie when karma hits and the roles are reversed. But instead, the character who was the victim the first time does something very nice and forgiving to the other one. And that, again, was a great subversion of expectations. This movie was great freaking storytelling and characters the way it should be done. I cannot praise it. I know I haven't talked too much about like the production and like the aesthetics. I mean, there's not really much bad to say here. The movie looks great. It's shot, I heard it was shot in like a little over a month, so that's impressive. It's a very ballsy movie, a very well-written movie, and it's getting all kinds of love, and I think you should go out there and check out this film. It's got a little bit of a limited release. It's not a big movie. Right now, the movie theaters are packed with Star Wars, Insidious, The Commuter. Those are the big movies out now. This is a sleeper hit, I think, for the casual audience, but it needs to be seen because if you want a good story, a great story with great characters that are flawed but still fascinating and interesting, and a movie where you're going to be talking about it with your friends afterward, you need to go see Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. I didn't think it was going to be this good. Anyways, that's my review. Let me know what you thought if you've seen it. If not, go see it. Thank you, and I hope you all have a great day.